to start as close to on time as we can. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Courtney Biergard. I'm the Assistant Town Administrator here in the town of Rockland. I just wanted to make a couple quick remarks before I turn the floor over to Lisa and to John. I want to start by just saying thank you to all of you for your service here in Rockland. We can't do any of the stuff that we do without your support and your interest and effort. So I just want to thank you all for one, serving in the roles that you're serving in, and then also taking the time tonight to come and do the boards and committees training. I know that this has been done in the past, and we're going to continue to do this, I think annually moving forward in a similar format. Tonight, we will be recording this session, and I just forgot I was supposed to be speaking into a mic. We'll be recording the session. I'll send it out to everybody. I'll also send out the handouts that I had up front here, which includes the presentation from Lisa and her team, and also from John Clifford and his team at Clifford and Kenny. And I'll also be sharing with you the boards and committees handbook that we have available online on the town's website, and a few other resources that I know of through the state website. With that, I think I'm just going to turn it over. Again, just thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate your time. This is important work, and I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to talk a little bit about WRPS and how they can support your efforts and the process kind of around that.
To advance, I just click.
Yeah, you can just click there.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I know this is the best place to be on such a beautiful Thursday night. But, you know, when this kind of all came to be, we thought, well, it's a good time for us to kind of reintroduce ourselves. So I'm Lisa, and along with Chris and Seth, the three of us make up WRPS. For those of you who don't know, we started as a radio station 50 years ago. As part of the high school, we were like a club in the high school. And then in the 80s, we became the local access television station for the town of Rockland. Pretty much every town that has a cable service, whether it's Comcast, Verizon, or otherwise, they have a local access channel, and it's paid for by the cable subscribers. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. So we're not part of the town budget. We're not part of the school budget. We reside in the school because we started as a club, and radio keeps us very busy. We have live DJs every day. We have all kinds of things that go on. So we have interns, we work with the students, whatnot, but we are part of kind of like a company within the school, sort of like when there used to be a bank here. People kind of, you know, I use that as a reference. It's like we're like a company that is just in the school. So that being said, I wanted to kind of briefly go over what our obligations are. So the people who have cable and pay for our service, we have a contract with Comcast, with Verizon. We actually just renewed our Comcast contract. And I'm not going to read this. It'll be in your handouts. But basically, we are formed strictly to create content for TV. So we have to create 3 different categories, which is public, educational, and government. And public, obviously, being anything that, you know, could appeal to the residents. Educational, to educate, or could be even school-related. Government is where you all fall in, and that's meetings for the most part. But we also cover things that go on with different departments. We might talk about things that are going on. So, you know, keeping that in mind, so already we've got, right, half of what we do is the radio station, the other half is the TV station. And then the TV station is kind of divided in thirds. So as much as we'd like to say that all we do is cover meetings, that's just not true. We do a lot. And we're trying to create more of a public outreach. I'm not sure also if you're aware of this, but David Cable Murphy, who led us for 18 years, was a teacher, and when he retired, it was left to Chris and I, and were they going to bring in a teacher and kind of oversee what we had already been doing for 10 years, or were they going to allow us to go on without the classroom? And that's what we elected to do, and I'm grateful, because now we have kids that aren't attached to a grade, and that's all I'm going to say about that. We have kids who want to be there, and it's awesome, but we're busy all the time with those kids, and what a great opportunity. So they contribute to a lot of the content. These kids are very well-versed in, what it is that to make video productions, and some of them are more, geared towards doing one thing or another, but they get to create a lot of this content that helps us fulfill that obligation we have. So again, this is kind of paraphrased, we are required to create content, that's what we're here to do. We are also required to allow residents to use our facilities. We've got a beautiful television studio. I don't know if anybody's been there, but if you haven't, please come check it out anytime. It's state of the art. It's a lot bigger, brighter, cleaner, beautifuler than most professional stations, so you'd be really impressed. We are not required to maintain anything that's been past recorded. We're not town record keepers or anything like that. And when available, we also will make sure that you have access to our equipment if you wanted to create your own stuff or cover a meeting on your own. So those are our kind of obligations. Okay, what this means. I picked this photo because, yes, it takes place in our TV studio, but it's not a meeting. It's actually from our summer program that we do with the Rockland Recreation this past summer, and we're going to do it every year. We introduced middle schoolers to us, which was phenomenal. Kids don't have to wait till they're in high school anymore. They can sign up for a summer program and get to interview people and be a part of the whole station. And so, it's our studio, but it kind of represents other things that we do as well. We are always going to attempt to cover as many meetings as possible, but when we can't, we have to kind of consider other options, like offering our equipment, things like that. Booking early with us is always welcome. Most meetings happen after hours for us, so after 6 p.m. is kind of considered after hours. And I wasn't going to do this, but I keep kind of thinking about it, so I'm going to tell a little story that before COVID, from the 80s until 2000-ish, WRPS historically only ever covered one meeting a week. It was either select board or school committee. We stayed late one night a week, and we covered a meeting. Then COVID happened, and everybody had to go virtual, and it was determined then, well, how do we do this and still be able to have unlimited number of participants and unlimited amount of time, because some of our meetings, as you know, can go 2-3 hours. So we, with the town, worked with the town, and we got our own Zoom account, and that allowed us to, the show went on. Meetings still happened. They were still accessible to the public. Now that we're back full swing in person, it's becoming a little more difficult. So that's why we're asking for a week's notice. I hope you understand that. We have lives and families and obligations that we deal with outside of work, so giving a week's notice when you can is very welcome. Okay, how do you book these virtual meetings on Zoom? Basically, email us, call us, you can text us. I've left our website, our email address, and our phone number on the bottom of every single page of this handout. If you ever can't find us for some reason, talk to somebody at Town Hall, Courtney, or whatever. It's always a good idea to email the generic email address because it goes to all of us as opposed to just trying to go through one person that you usually deal with, which is kind of okay until that person is sick and not checking their email, or they're on vacation, because we are all, we deserve to go on vacation sometimes. So it's good to, go with the generic phone number and email address. You'll hit one of us a lot faster. For the Zoom meetings, and you can elect not to, but it's very easy for us to stream to YouTube. And that's another reason why we suggest definitely use our Zoom account. If you've got a personal Zoom account, you want to have your meeting on it, I don't suggest you do that because we can stream it to YouTube, we can record it, we know exactly where the recording is, we can get the transcript, we're used to doing it. And like I said before, we purchased a Zoom account that can, allow for so many participants and so many unlimited minutes and things like that. Okay. And for in-person meetings, again, same thing. If you need to involve us because you want us to record something, let us know. Call us, email us, whatever, and we'll set it up. We can live stream and go live on TV in a few different locations. This room, we can. We're not tonight, we're just recording it, but we can live stream from here. We can go live on TV from here. Also the auditorium. You have to book those through the superintendent's office, though. They control these spaces. You can book our studio. We offer that. And I believe those are in the upper meeting room at Town Hall, but that would have to be booked through Town Hall as well. Courtney. And then if you just want it recorded, you can kind of do that anywhere. As long as you have a camera and a tripod, you can record. We'll give you that. If you wanted to, come and borrow some equipment, which I think I have on the very last page, same thing. Email us, call us, we'll set that up. You can pick up the equipment. We'll show you how to use it. It's prosumer, so it looks good, but it's very easy to manipulate. And so we would be glad to do that, and that's part of our cable contract. So you get like a camera battery card to record on a tripod. If you need microphones, great. You usually don't. If it's the small room, you really don't. And we have a lot of people in the community and board and committee members who come and do that. They come and borrow a camera and they take it away and then bring it back. So these are all options. We're happy to assist with any of the above options. Just kind of give us a little bit of courtesy. If you have a meeting that you know about, maybe give us a heads up, even if it's not officially booked. That way we can put it on our calendar, and if something else comes up, we can kind of give priority. And that's it. So I'm going to hand it back over to Courtney and the attorneys.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
And again, I'm going to share all of Lisa's contact, all of her slides, and you can always, I have left my business card up here too, so if you need to get in touch with me for any reason, you can always grab my card too on your way out. All right, John, you are up.
Good evening, everybody. My name's John Clifford. I'm town council. I've been town council here in Rockland since 2008. Before that, I was actually a town administrator for many years. I've been in this business for 30 years. With me is Rich Messina. He's been with the firm 6 years. He's a New York guy, a Jets and Knicks fan, but we hired him anyway. And Rich has been a great addition to the firm, and I think Rich is going to help me out with the presentation. You have copies of the agenda and what we're going to try to cover, but I really want to sum it up by saying it's our job to try to keep you all out of trouble. The saying that always comes back to me for people in your position, you're all volunteers, and as we all know, no good deed goes unpunished, right? So what we try to do is give you practical advice for the situations that you're going to run into as board members. We can't cover everything. We're going to go through the material kind of quickly to get as much as we can. This isn't your only opportunity to ask questions. You have Doug and Courtney in the town administrator's office. Our billing arrangement with the town of Rockland is people can call or email as much as they want. It's a flat fee. And the reason we do that is because before you make critical decisions, especially employment-related decisions, we want you to call and to ask us and talk it through to make sure that we're all in agreement this is the right way to go, we're in conformance with the law. So that's what we try to do, keep you out of trouble. You're already putting in so much of your time and energy. We hate to see people get dinged for things like open meeting complaints, public records issues, conflict of interest issues. Those things are painful when they happen, so we try to help you avoid them. Just to go through the agenda, we're going to talk generally about the goals and the roles and responsibilities of committee and board members. We're going to talk a little bit about onboarding for new members. We can't get into specifics. I see the faces out here, and I recognize a lot of you. I know you're from a lot of different boards and committees. We're going to talk a little bit about interacting and working with town employees. What's your role as a volunteer? What's their role to support you? We're going to talk about discrimination and harassment. which is something that is a common issue for people like yourselves who serve in these capacities. We're going to talk about personal liability. Again, our goal is to try to keep you out of trouble. Over the course of time, we've acquired a lot of experience in what can go wrong with the meetings, so we're going to try to give you practical advice on how to manage your meetings, what works, what doesn't. We're going to talk about the open meeting law and the public records law, which are the bane of all of our existence. I'll say generally about the open meeting law, the only people that are not subject to any open meeting requirements are the people that wrote that law and imposed it on us, the Massachusetts legislature. They don't do anything in the open. So it's an important distinction, but we'll talk about that, how to keep you all out of trouble there. Boards, it's difficult when you join one of these boards, and it's very common for people to get appointed or elected to a board and not really know, as a practical matter, what your real responsibilities are. It is important, and you can certainly find that information from those of you that have staff that work for your board. You can find it from your fellow board members to get support, but you really want to understand the basic mission of your board. What is it that you're there to do? And in a lot of cases, the public has no understanding of that. One of the things I've seen a lot over the years, zoning boards of appeals, those people are there to make very specific decisions, and they have to follow the law. And when they come up against a 40B project, people on the ZBAs get tormented because people don't understand what their basic role is. And we're also going to talk about what's the best way to handle a citizen complaint. How do we get it through the process? How do we make sure that we get back to people when we have those complaints? For new board and committee members, there is a fairly easy online training certification program that's put out by the Ethics Commission. You have to go through that. It's pretty much multiple choice, and if you give the wrong answer, they keep making you go back and do it until you give the right answer. I'm not going to say that you're going to take a lot away from this, but you have to go through it. The conflict of it, I do recommend that you pay attention to that, because if a complaint is filed against you as a violation of the conflict of interest law, you are on your own, okay? The town doesn't provide legal guidance for you, no representation. You're, everybody's favorite position. You're fighting with the state agency. So I really recommend that you try to be careful. If you have an issue, and one of the quirks in the conflict of interest law, and we're not going to cover it much at all tonight, really, one of the quirks is you can violate the conflict of interest law for engaging in behavior that creates the appearance of a conflict. That is such an unusual case in the law. You can't get arrested and convicted for having the appearance of robbing a bank. You either rob the bank or you don't. But you can be found responsible for violating the conflict of interest law if you engage in conduct that looks like it. So pay attention when you go through that training. You do have to get sworn in by the town clerk's office. That's, as soon as you're appointed, as soon as you're elected, you have to go to the town clerk. That also applies if you're reappointed. It doesn't matter if you've been on the board or committee for 10 successive terms, and I think some of you have been on boards and committees for a long time. You have to get sworn in. But if you're not sure, as a new board or committee member, reach out to Doug, reach out to Courtney, and they'll steer you in the right direction, where you can get some guidance, how to get in touch with people, how to meet those requirements.
And we can't stress enough how important it is to pay attention, at least at a bare minimum, on that training, because so often do we wind up doing investigations where the allegations are almost word for word the examples they give in those trainings. And at that point, you have notice of those rules and obligations. So those are the ones to avoid for the most part.
Volunteer officials like yourselves get accused, and we'll talk a little bit about social media and Facebook, volunteer officials like yourselves get accused all the time of being on the take and everything else. And it's almost never happened in my 30 years of experience, certainly compared to the number of times people get accused of it. So be careful of the conflict of interest law. When do you as a board member have authority? When do you have the power to do things? I don't know. I'd love to make this interactive. Does anybody want to volunteer? Tell me, when do you have authority to do something?
I don't.
Okay.
All I do is present a report.
Any other suggestions? Yeah.
I know Community Preservation Committee, we can authorize use of our administrative funds.
When can you do that?
In our meeting.
In a meeting. If you're a member of a board or committee, when you walk into a legally posted meeting, you have authority. As soon as you leave that board or committee meeting, you don't have authority. You have collective authority as a board or committee. You can't make individual decisions that bind your board, bind the town. Everything has to be done in an open meeting. So when you start making decisions, directing people to do things outside of a meeting, that's where you start to put yourself at risk. That is the biggest limitation on your authority. If you're not sure what you can or can't do inside of a meeting, that's when you reach out to Doug Courtney or you reach out to our office, and we can certainly help you. But generally, you can only do things that you have when you're in those meetings. In terms of the law, the town charter was originally adopted in 1969. It has been modified slightly over the course of 50 years, but it hasn't gone through any kind of a major revision. There was a major revision proposed at last year's town meeting. It didn't pass. So it's somewhat of a dated document. But the town charter it's proposed by the town and then it's adopted by the legislature. It has the weight of state law. If you go to the town charter to see what your board or committee does, however, you'll find precious little guidance, practical guidance to tell you. It's pretty bare bones. It talks about how many members are on the committee, who's elected, that kind of thing, but there really isn't much in terms of specific guidance in terms of what your committee has to do. There are state statutes that govern most of our boards, the Board of Health, the Planning Board, the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Select Board. There are state statutes that govern those, that provide some guidance, but those laws, by and large, are even older than the charter. They go back 30s, 40s, 50s, and not much has been done to update those. So in addition to that, the next level down in the hierarchy are town bylaws. The town bylaws also provide you precious little in terms of practical guidance in terms of what you're supposed to do. Your board, under the charter, can adopt and should adopt policies, all right? And it's not this mammoth undertaking. You will find there are listservs, and certainly Doug and Courtney can steer you there. You know, the planning board in Rockland is not that dissimilar from the planning board in Hanover and Holbrook and all the other towns around you. You can get draft policies and procedures, you know, tweak them as you think necessary and adopt them. But that's where you can really flesh out how do we do our week-to-week business. So that's a good idea for you to do. But again, if you have questions about what should be done, that's the time to speak with us. Indemnification and liability, this is really important. The town adopted General Law, Chapter 258, Section 13. Generally, you are indemnified for actions taken within the scope of your lawful authority. That means decisions you make in a posted committee or board meeting, right? You can make bad decisions, all right? In the context of a board or committee meeting, you're indemnified, all right? You're going to be covered by the town. You can make dumb decisions, all right? And generally, they're going to be protected as well, right? People don't have to agree with every decision, right? But again, once you step outside of that board or committee meeting, then you don't have the lawful protection of what you do in the meeting. You may not be indemnified for actions that you take outside of the meeting. If you take actions that are in violation of the open meeting law, you can also get into trouble. We're going to talk about the open meeting law. The place where you can really, the biggest source of risk of that kind of liability for the open meeting law is if you go into executive session. When you go into executive session, you trigger rights of individuals, and if you violate those rights, you can create a problem. If you violate someone's civil rights, you may not be protected. Intentional torts, basically defamation is one that comes up. You know, we could spend all night talking about the First Amendment, but in questions of liability, the takeaway I'd really like you all to have is, as long as you're inside of a lawful meeting, you're generally going to be okay, right? You may get named personally as a member of the planning board or the zoning board or the select board, but the town insurance company will provide counsel, and the town will generally cover. Even if it went all the way to a judgment against you, you'll be defended. You don't have to worry about it, as long as you're acting inside of a meeting. So that's really the big takeaway that I wanted you to have there. Does anybody have any questions on the liability part of it?
All right, so hopping in here. So it's important to understand and remember at all times that most, if not all, of the buildings in town are workplaces. So that includes town hall, this building, anywhere that you may be holding meetings. And because of that, it's important to know that you are still subject to all of the policies and procedures of the town, all its rules and regulations, and things governed by statute. That would also include any specific rights that an employee would have under the law, the laws of Massachusetts, or the collective bargaining laws, whether they're a union employee, a bylaw employee. There's a whole host of rights that will apply. Looking at harassment and discrimination is important because, going back to what John was just talking about with liability, violations of the town's discrimination harassment policy can also be under here. So this comes into play when your board might receive complaints. The obligation of the town, just like in a workplace, because it is a workplace, bias, and HR offices to assist in conducting those complaints. When you receive them, you need to get them to Doug, Courtney, or HR so that they can be adequately assessed, and if it is a credible complaint, we can figure out what exactly to do. So taking a closer look at discrimination and harassment specifically, those are terms that we hear colloquially a lot, like somebody's being harassed or it's a hostile work environment, but it is an actual term under the law with a specific definition. So your policies for the town against discrimination and harassment are against unlawful discrimination or harassment. And that means any sort of discrimination or harassment based on a protected category, and generally those are race, gender, religion, national origin, ancestry, age, disability, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And those are what is prohibited for discrimination under the law. That's Chapter 151B. So how do you guys as volunteers make sure that you are not violating those policies? So as members of boards, you may fall into supervisory status over some of the employees that you may be directing. And in that case, you have to make sure you're reporting anything that you see in your day-to-day at a meeting or anything that you hear from employees. And that's reporting it to HR or to the town administrator's office. it's important for you guys to know, and it will be explained to you time and time again if you ever wind up sitting as a witness in an investigation, is that there is absolutely no retaliation against witnesses or people bringing forward complaints, because those can generate additional charges beyond just the regular discrimination and harassment.
We've all seen stories in the news of harassment, discrimination, $1 million judgments against employers. They all share one common thread, and that is that the person, the victim, complained about it, and the employer didn't do anything. So the thing to remember is when a complaint comes in, our first obligation, our most important obligation, is to investigate. So you have to, and it's difficult, and again, you're not necessarily working, you're not in town hall during normal business hours, but if you get anything that looks or sounds like a discrimination complaint, let Doug know, let Courtney know, let Lori, our new HR director, know, let someone know, right? But it's doing nothing or ignoring the complaints. That's what creates big liability. That's what creates $1 million judgments.
Yeah. The town will have found to condone the behavior, even though it's not actually condoning it by not acting. All right, so as members of boards and committees, you will interact with town staff, and you have responsibilities to them as they do to you. So let's go through your responsibilities to them first. So communicating outside of meetings, we have to make sure it's professional and respectful. They need to be updated on what you guys actually need so that they can meet your expectations. That gets to setting clear expectations. We see the breakdown between committee members and town staff when there isn't clear communication, usually flowing through one person. So if some individual on the board is not following specific protocols or things like that, it may create things that are messy. Also, there's always got to be a line as to how things are going to be communicated to staff, because if a single member requests something from staff, say, I need you to pull all the emails for the last 5 years related to this topic, if that's not actually related to a board matter or something the board's actually looking into, but may be of interest to a specific member, that's not really an appropriate use of that individual's time if the entire board isn't, interested in this topic or looking into it. So a lot of the times we'll hear that from staff, that a certain member is abusing that or, trying to get through to something else through that avenue. So make sure you make the town aware of those things. You guys will also be giving formal and informal feedback on performance. A lot of the times, the boards and committees are not the actual appointing authorities. That's all laid out through the charter and usually falls to the select board or the town administrator's office. And in that case, they need your feedback as to how a certain employee is doing. Sometimes there's falling outs. We can deal with those things, and when there's personality conflicts, especially on boards that change over year to year, you can't always plan for it going super easy. But we need to have that feedback on a regular basis so that we can evaluate if it's working out. And then looking forward to the staff's responsibilities to the board. That's keeping all members of the board equally informed. So you don't want the information only flowing back from the town to the board to one person. You want to make sure they're setting you up for success. So think about the things you actually need them to do, things that will make the meetings more productive. If there's a packet that needs to be given to the members beforehand, it's important that all the things are in there. These are little things that can make your meetings go much, much easier. And then carrying out the board's policy decisions and objectives. Depending on the amount of staff you may have under you in the department on a specific board, you may have different responsibilities. The Board of Health is overseeing all health inspections, but there is also a health agent who is dealing with that on the day-to-day. So there'll be different continuums, but you want to make sure that they're using their time in a way that's making you guys successful as well.
Just talking, in this, very few people sign up or run for a board or a committee with the goal of supervising an employee. all right? That's not why people get into this. They get into it because they're interested in the subject matter that's before that board or committee. But, you know, you have to find ways to have a good working relationship with the staff that supports you, and that's really a challenge. And one of the things that's a common issue that we see throughout, and we work in 30 different cities and towns right now, one of the things we see a lot is volunteer board members are frustrated because they don't feel like the staff is responsive. When Rich says it's their job to make you look good, that means if you see something on the agenda and you feel like there's more information you need before the meeting, let the staff person know. That makes you all look good. If you're on the planning board, zoning board, conservation commission, and people are coming before you and they're bringing their attorney or they're bringing their engineer, and we have to make them come back because we didn't have all the information, that's a hardship on them. So communicate with your staff people before the meeting, make sure that you have all the information that you need to be successful.
And we like to think all the town employees are superstars, and they're all great, but every once in a while, you may wind up with an employee that it just isn't working out, and you need to identify that to the town administrator. And there are ways that we can, as management, work through that. Well, it may not be that this person is awful. There may be things that they need through some sort of performance management to become a better employee, to learn the topic. There's a lot of very specified work that all the different boards and committees do. Maybe they're new to it and filling in for somebody else. So work with Doug and HR to figure out how to get around those issues. And now, public hearings and due process. So a public hearing for a board and committee is something different than a board discussion. It includes a board discussion, but there are other parameters and notification processes set around it. So providing due process, that's appropriate notice, and depending on what kind of public hearing it is, it could differ by statute. So make sure you're aware of what that statutory notice is. There also needs to be an opportunity to be heard and a remedy. The big thing here is the public comment period, and that is something that can get out of hand. It's important to know how to navigate that. So there's a couple things here that you're going to want to make sure you do. You're going to want to announce the opening of the public comment and make sure you're not taking public comment before that or after it closes. Speakers must identify themselves. Usually that's by name and address. You allow them to speak. The board should not respond to every single statement in kind. Allow that person to speak. Wait until they're finished. The board can ask any sort of clarifying questions that it may have, and then move on to the next person. Once all of the people are done, the board can sort of take all of those comments and have a discussion, but public comment is now closed. So there's no public comment that can happen after that, and it allows you guys to deliberate without somebody standing at the pulpit and screaming at you. So those are, hopefully helpful to run a good public hearing.
We next want to talk about respectful and professional communication. I guess, we should all forget the debate that we just watched the other night if we're going to talk about respectful communication. But we ask everybody to be mindful that you're representing the town. And we don't just say that, if your meeting happens to be televised and recorded by WRPS, you are the town's representative. And one of the things we always remind town employees, and we remind you of the same thing, the average citizen doesn't come to town hall, doesn't attend meetings on a regular basis. If they're before your board, it's for something that's really important to them, and we really have to make a good effort to make sure that we're representing the town well. You need to set expectations in terms of what's appropriate and what's civil and respectful in terms of the way people speak with you and the way you respond to them. Personal attacks, if someone comes to your board and they make a personal attack of one of the board members, the chair should step in and say, that's really inappropriate, that's not what we're here for. The biggest thing, and again, I ask everybody to forget what they see on TV every day and read in the news. We can disagree with somebody's opinion in a respectful manner, but when we start to question their motives, that's when we run into trouble. Again, I see it so often where board and committee members are accused of being on the take or, taking care of their buddies, and it's just almost never the case. But that's what you should insist on in your meetings. Some boards and committees, things can get very informal. There are some boards and committees where the public never attends, your meetings aren't broadcast. That can happen. But you can also see it kind of getting really off topic, a little bit inappropriate, and, that's where you as individual board members try to be part of a town board or a committee. We have seen in a number of cases where it just becomes so burdensome for people to run their meetings, just to do their jobs. You want to establish protocols. If you are having a board discussion of a topic, you don't need to allow public comment. You can, it's permissible, but you don't need to do it. But your topics, one of the ways that we find it, those boards that are successful is they organize it around board discussions, all right? This is a new topic, we're going to have a discussion. We're not necessarily going to make a decision tonight. We're going to have a discussion, find out if there's more information we need, or there's someone else we need to come to the next meeting. So that's a discussion. Action, this one I can think of an action item that should be prints of the last meeting. Unless there's questions, edits, something that needs to be changed, a vote up and down, and you can move forward. And then, as Rich talked about, the public hearings. Those are, for the select board, it can be liquor license hearings, the zoning board, special permits, those kinds of things. There are statutory notice requirements. You need to follow all the technicalities. But if you need help structuring the meeting, again, Doug and Courtney can help you. If you find that your meetings are just running way too long, you may just need help structuring the meeting. Does anybody have any questions or?
Quick question here.
Sure.
What's the difference between a board and a committee?
There isn't one, just a name,
Commonality.
yeah. There isn't, for our perspective, there isn't any difference. Face a difficult topic. This is where boards and committees get really challenged. Just as we already talked about managing public input, you create an opportunity, a time if you want public input, then you close that portion of the meeting. Then it's time for your board to have your own discussion, for you to deliberate. You want to try to make sure you have all the necessary information before the meeting. If a meeting gets heated, and it happens, I'll tell you the one thing never to do, never call the police. I mean, I've heard people in my line of work say, we're going to have the police take the person out. Never, ever, ever do that, all right? If a meeting got really heated, even if it's just between board members, there's nothing wrong with saying, let's take 5. Let's take 5 minutes, cool off, come back, start the meeting, same place, and people are still really angry. Table the subject for another day. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's certainly better than having a contentious meeting spin out of control. That's really important, and it's a good way to avoid really running into difficulties.
And one of the last people who, in one of the towns we worked in, was escorted out by police, made that their profile picture on Facebook, and they loved talking about it to everyone in town. If a person is willing to get arrested at a public meeting like that, they want to at that point.
How many of you have meetings that routinely go more than 2 hours? Anybody? And which board is that?
Zoning board?
Okay. I mean, how often do you meet?
When we had 4 40Bs going at the same time, it was every night, yeah.
Really?
But honestly, once a month, sometimes twice a month now.
Okay. And how late would you go?
Yeah, we've gone 12:30.
Yeah.
But again, that was 40Bs and stuff. A normal meeting, where
Mm-hmm.
we only have like, let's say, 3 applicants, discussion items, approved minutes,
Mm-hmm.
10:30.
I mean, one of the things that you all have to be realistic about is, I guess, remember what your parents said about nothing good happening after 11 or 12 or whatever they happen to say. That's very true in town government as well. When a meeting starts to run long, you know, a lot of you folks are working full-time jobs, people are tired, you know, we're not making a lot of good decisions that late at night. So there's nothing wrong with adjourning the meeting to another date. Some best practices, really try to manage your agenda. In the case of the 40Bs, you guys don't, you know, they come to you, you have to deal with them. You don't have much control over it. But if you do have the discretion to spread things out, schedule additional meetings, as unpleasant as that is, it's probably more productive and a better result to schedule extra meetings than to just try to grind your way through a 4 or 5 or a 6-hour meeting. It's not an open meeting law. We're going to talk a little bit about the open meeting law specifically. It's not an open meeting law violation to discuss what will be on your agenda, as long as you don't start expressing opinions on those subjects. So if you know that 2 or 3 big topics are coming up on the agenda and you think it's going to take too long, there's nothing wrong with emailing your fellow board or committee members and saying, why don't we table one of these to another meeting? I think it's going to take too much time. As long as you don't weigh in on and provide substantive opinions, that's fine. That's not an issue. Again, try to make it as workable for yourself. You can also schedule a conference call to talk about the agenda, as long as you don't give substantive opinions on what the subject matter is. Try to be realistic about what you can really accomplish in a meeting. You know, again, try to manage your own workload and respect everybody's time and energy to try to do that. As a general matter, and there is no law that says that the chair sets the agenda. That's a protocol, right? There's nothing formal that really says that. We do not abide by Robert's Rules of Order. They're not strictly applicable to our meetings. But as chair, if a member really wants to talk about a subject, I would always recommend put it on the agenda, all right? If it's repetitive or something that's, you know, you've gone over time and again, you know, you don't have to, but if it's a new subject, something you haven't spoken about, I would always advise you put it on the agenda. You know, board members, committee members shouldn't be frustrated by something never being on the agenda, something that they want to talk about, all right? If it's something that there isn't much you can do about, there's no, you know, necessarily good outcome you can deal with, at least give the board member, the committee member, the opportunity to be heard. Is this you?
I think it's you, and I'll open the next one.
This one, responding to complaints and policy violations. Again, as Rich indicated, we're obligated to investigate, to respond to complaints. If you're not sure what to do, if it's something that's within your purview, reach out to Doug, Courtney, they'll reach out to us. You have to make us available if there's anything that looks like a complaint of discrimination or harassment. But really, if you need assistance with an employee issue, that's what the town administrator's office is there for, that's what the HR office is there for. It's very difficult for a volunteer board member who's working on it a couple of hours a week to effectively manage an employee, especially if you're having an issue. That's what the professional paid staff is there to do.
Okay. All right. So now, the open meeting law. This is where we see members get into issues or have a lot of questions or have to learn how to operate within, especially for first-time members. So who does it apply to? It applies to public bodies and all of its members. And notice must be posted for all meetings. These are different obligations. Let's see if I have those.
Decidable.
It might be. Oh, no, I just skipped a page. Sorry. So,
It is up there.
yes, I see. Sorry, I was one ahead. We'll go back to that. So, all of you operate as part of members and committees of public bodies on your boards and committees. There's only very select few committees that don't have to operate within the open meeting law or in public meetings, and we'll get to that a little later. But what you want to know is what constitutes a public meeting, and there are 4 questions. So whether or not a communication is between or among members of that public body, and if it does it constitute deliberation? And we'll get to the definition of that in a little bit. Does the communication involve a matter within the body's jurisdiction? So, a topic of which you guys actually have authority over? And if so, does the communication fall within an exception listed in the law? Okay, so now back to where I was. There's some obligations that go along with being a member of a public body. First is notice must be posted for all of your meetings. Generally, that's 48 hours. There are some exceptions, but know that unless some other statute may apply or an exception, it would be 48 hours. That usually does not count weekends, holidays, so always count that into, when you're looking at the calendar, how many days out you need to be when you're issuing an agenda or things like that. Meetings must be open to the public unless the meeting enters executive session. That's probably something you're mostly familiar with, but there are 10 exceptions as to when a body may go into executive session. And any other time, business must be conducted in public. Minutes of all meetings must be kept and approved. We'll get into the detail of which you have to write them. And please know there are penalties for violations administered by the Attorney General's office. So every once in a while, or depending on what's going on frequently, we'll help the town deal with open meeting law violations, allegations of the same, and may contact you about how a meeting may have gone over. So first, what is a public body? So a public body is all elected or appointed boards and committees, specially appointed committees or subcommittees by selectmen or school committee, a subcommittee of Conservation Commission, an ad hoc building study or committee, and a screening committee appointed by a board or committee. This is one of those instances where you'll have an exception of what isn't a public body. We'll get to those here. These would be Democratic Republican town committees, group planning, retirement party, parent-teacher organization, a department or staff meeting, but then we get into the Connolly exception. So recently I helped the town with a police chief search, but the appointing authority was the town administrator. The panel that was convened and put together by the town administrator in that case was not a public body. So when they met, it was just over Zoom or in a room together to talk about how they were going to go about asking questions. The reason for that is this exception, where the appointing authority is not a public body, the committee that they convene is also not a public body, so they don't have to follow those exceptions. You would likely know if you were a member or committee of one of those sorts of things, but given the fact that you're either all elected or appointed by a board, you're always going to have to operate as if you are a public body. Okay, so deliberation, because this is what's going to dictate whether or not there is a violation of the open meeting law, because you must do all of your deliberating in an open meeting unless there's an exception for an executive session. So the definition here is an oral or written communication through any medium, including email, between or among a quorum of a public body on any public business within its jurisdiction. So breaking those down individually, any sort of communication, a text message, a conversation, even if it's not recorded, those will all constitute deliberations if they're, amongst members of the board. It's important to know that it's a quorum, so maybe 2 members, if you're on a 5-member board, would not constitute that, but you need to be aware, especially when most boards and committees are a little smaller, maybe 3 people, that you'll cross that line once you're just having a conversation with one other person. And it's on any public business within its jurisdiction. So if you're on the Conservation Commission and it's about an item that's going to be on an agenda at your next meeting, then absolutely, that would be a deliberation.
You can't get around the open meeting law with what they call serial deliberation. On a 5-member board, board member A calls B, B calls C, C calls D, et cetera, just to try to get, basically to make a decision outside of a meeting. You can't get around it that way. When there's a dispute, for example, if it was a planning board issue and the planning board was sued, all of those communications, all of the texts, all of the emails, everything will be in discovery. Everything will be subject to a subpoena or a demand that you turn everything over. So we really try to tell everybody, avoid doing that. It's not a good way to get around it.
Okay.
Question about
Yeah.
this. If you have a committee member who is seeking clarification on something that was discussed, can there be a one-on-one discussion as long as the quorum is not, say, it's a 3-member committee, quorum's 2. But if it's more than that, right? Is that a violation of open meeting law?
If you restrict it to 2 people, I think you're okay. I think you're fine, all right? But,
Sometimes that happens, it's like,
Sure.
someone doesn't understand what happened, it's like, they want clarification.
right, absolutely, that's fine.
A very easy way to get tripped up by this on email is if, let's say, you receive an email from Doug about something that you all need to know about, and somebody replies all. That's a very easy way to violate the open meeting law, because you're now discussing this with your entire board and other people outside of it, and it's all a public record and it's not confidential, so it would be very easily discoverable, and it happens a lot. So mistakes can happen. When I send an email to an entire board, I usually include something in big bold text that says do not reply all, but that doesn't mean that they can't reply individually to ask me a question or find some further clarification. But better off not replying all to most emails you get, but especially these.
So you can share information, like the select board, approved Plan A.
Yep.
You can send that out to the board, and just, as long as there's just no feedback amongst them.
Yes, once that discussion starts, or there's a reply to everybody, even if it was just as a reply to you individually as a person sending it, that would, technically cross the line. Are you going to be charged, civilly fined $1 million for that? No. But it's one of those things where if it's routine enough and becomes a practice, it can become a big problem, because then you guys are all walking into meetings with all of the business already decided and done, and that's a red flag for the open meeting law. So again, that's anytime there's deliberation by a quorum of the public body with respect to something in its jurisdiction. And a quorum, like we had been talking about, it's going to be basically a majority, a simple majority. So 2 out of 3, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 7. Some of your boards, especially if you're approving plans, things like that on zoning, you might be doing site visits. A site visit is fine, and it is, even though it is the full board potentially gathering all together, it's not a violation unless there's deliberation. So if you're going on a site visit, you can even do simple things like ask clarifying questions, but once you start talking about the issue that you're there for and start sort of opining about things, about how it may be meeting certain criteria or not, that's deliberation. So you're best off just walking through without any comments, and once you get back to that open meeting, you can discuss everything that was there, going on there.
I represented a client who had a matter before a local ZBA, not here. And I reached out to the chair of the ZBA to say, can we talk about this situation? And he said, we don't talk about anything outside of a meeting. We absolutely never discuss things. It has to be done in a meeting. And I pulled up to town hall a few weeks later, and this board member and another board member, 3-member board, got out of the car, and they were in a completely detailed discussion about something that was going to be happening at the meeting. You know, I was like, okay, well, I guess that, he could have spoken to me about it as an individual, but they were clearly violating the law at that point.
All right, and here are some examples of things that don't constitute meetings under the open meeting law. So like a site visit, like I said. Second would be something like this, attendance at some sort of public or private gathering, like a training or a presentation. This, even though it's about technically the work that you do, we're not talking about specifics or anything really within the jurisdiction of your boards. So speaking generally on things like that is fine. And then attendance by a quorum of your board or committee at another public meeting by another body. That doesn't itself constitute a public meeting, especially if there's no deliberation by you and the members of your board. So you can feel free that you're not breaking the open meeting law just by showing up at a selectmen's meeting if you're not all on the Board of Selectmen. So,
And for town meeting purposes, you know, for those boards and committees, the Finance Committee, Capital Budget that meet, and the Select Board that meet before town meeting, they should post it if they're going to talk about anything. It should be a posted meeting. But if you're just going to town meeting and you all happen to be sitting together, that's fine. That's, you don't need to post that meeting, you don't need to worry about that. How many of you go into executive session? No, the Select Board does. Any of the other boards and committees? Yeah, okay. We can go down the rabbit hole of executive session. Rich mentioned there's 10 exceptions. They're all very detailed. They're all very limited. My suggestion is that if you're going into executive session, email town council just to make sure, okay? The way the law has been interpreted is really, really technical. You can, that is the area of the open meeting law you can get tripped up most easily, is going into executive session. And again, that's the area of the law where you can also potentially violate somebody's rights. The litigation exception is one of the ones that used to be abused pretty commonly. The litigation, it can't just be a theory like I think this person will sue. Unless you've received actual notice that, you know, the person is from an attorney that they are going to sue, or you've actually been sued, you shouldn't go into executive session on the litigation exception, because again, that's just where you're going to run into issues. Any questions or comments on the executive session part of it? Really, but the simplest thing to do is reach out. There are questions that we deal with every day, so we can give you really quick advice on it. How to post it, what are the limitations of the conversation. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize, and most of your boards don't get into it, the performance, the professional competence of an employee is open session material. That's another nonsensical part of the law, that you cannot talk about an employee's performance in executive session. Seems crazy. I didn't write the law, that's what the law is. So you can't say I want to talk about this person's performance and then go into executive session.
and likewise, anytime there's an investigation, if there's complaints or charges against someone specifically, that is definitely going to be something you want to talk about in executive session. So even if you're a board that doesn't routinely go in, reach out to us if there's any sort of complaint or investigation going on and the board needs to talk about it. You can. There are just a lot of rights for the person who's the subject of that investigation, or maybe the person filing the complaint. So that's a time when you'll know that you need to reach out to us and figure out how to navigate that space.
As a general rule, because executive session is so tricky, we try to tell boards and committees, don't go into executive session unless there's a decision or an action that you have to take. If it's a question of just getting information, You can get it from the staff, you can get information from council. The case of zoning and planning board, Bob Galvin can provide you all the information through an email. You can call Bob and ask him questions about it. But if there's no decision for you to make, we generally will tell you not to go into executive session. Again, the risk far outweighs the benefits. Minutes for those permitting boards, the minutes have to be more detailed, but this is one of the things that can make your job unnecessarily difficult, right? This is what you need to have in the minutes: date, time, place, members, the subjects discussed, and the actions of votes. How much detail do you have to get into when you talk about the subject? Anybody? Bueller? No.
Not as much as you think.
What's that?
Not as much as you think.
Right. Charlie's exactly right. If you say that you are going to, we get into a discussion about this particular site for the proposed new fire station, that's all you have to say, all right? We talked about this site. You certainly don't have to get into the level where you're quoting so-and-so said this, so-and-so said that. If there is a vote, then you have to record it. But in the case of the Finance Committee, for example, you talked about the budget. If you're going to vote the police and fire department budgets that night, you have to say, here's the vote. But you don't have to get into a detailed discussion where you say the fire chief's back asking for too much money or anything like that. You don't have to say those things, all right? Purely a hypothetical. The minutes, this is something where a lot of open meeting law violations are coming from. You have to list the documents that are used. So if it's a planning board meeting about a specific project, you have to list which documents they're being used in the context of that meeting. This is a difficult one. They have to be approved in a timely manner. 3 meetings or 30 days. Where do minutes go after you approve them? This is a very common issue. The former town clerk can certainly weigh in on that particular issue, right? People not sending the minutes to the town clerk's office. They have to be sent to the town clerk, all right? Then they can be posted online. Am I right about that, Donna? Absolutely. The best practice, the way to stay out of trouble with this is to, again, make sure you're not putting extra content, creating extra work for yourself, writing the minutes, draft them right after the meeting, circulate them, and vote them at the next meeting. Yes?
Just a question on the time frame there. If the 3 meetings are spread out over potentially several months, is that acceptable?
It is. The issue that it's come up with is the rent control board, which only, that's one of the boards. They may only meet 2 or 3 times a year. But again, if you have a meeting in November and you have another meeting in March, it's going to be pretty hard to go back and say what really happened in November. So again, quick, bare bones, the basic outline of what the requirements are, do the minutes, circulate them, and vote them whenever that next meeting is.
Can I ask you a question?
Yep.
I have, more of a comment. In the town charter, it says that we all can't meet any more than, any less than every 8 weeks. It says that, word for word. So, any board that's not meeting every 8 weeks is in violation of the town charter, aren't they?
They are, and the charter was written before we had rent control, for example.
No, I believe that, I believe.
So, I think that was one of the things that we were going to try to address in the update in the charter. So, there are a lot of charters that still say, I'm not sure if it's the case here, that you have to post legal notices in the newspaper, or you have to post the whole town meeting warrant as a legal notice, which is incredibly expensive, And I defy anybody here to tell me the last time they read the legal notices in a real newspaper. I mean, it's just, it's a great thing it's keeping some of our newspapers alive, but it's not doing anything in terms of informing the public. Some town charters had language that you had to mail the warrant to every single household, which is incredibly expensive and incredibly wasteful. There are charter requirements like that that just aren't practical. It also says in the charter that every board and committee has to have policies and procedures.
Right.
I would say it's something you should do. I mean, the only,
You just said it was something we should do.
yeah, it is something that you should do. But as a practical matter, you know, can the select board enforce that or force volunteer boards and committees to do those kinds of things? No. In theory, someone could file a 10 taxpayer lawsuit and go to court and try to get a court to order, you know, the zoning board to have policies and procedures, but it's just not practical. I mean, that's one reason why the charter has to be updated on a periodic basis. But I think when you have restrictions like that they have to meet every 8 weeks, you know, if it's a board or committee that doesn't have anything to do, I would, you know, and that's the case of the rent control board. They generally act on rent control petitions from one of the 3 parks. If they don't have a petition, why should they meet? It's hard enough to get volunteers on a lot of these boards anyway. Having them meet just for that sake is really impractical. Common open meeting law pitfalls, again, the reply all thing, phone polling, serial deliberation, going into executive session. If you get an open meeting law complaint, the most important thing that you should do is reach out to the town administrator's office and reach out to us. There is a very specific way that those complaints, and there's set timelines that we have to respond by. So it's not uncommon for a complaint to be completely groundless. There's a lot of, and it's common in the public that they don't understand the open meeting law. But when you get the complaint, just pass it along to us. If we're behind on minutes, all right, I would say if you joined a committee or a board, Council on Aging, for example, and you found out that there, you know, no minutes had been approved for the last 5 years. Now you're in the position of voting to approve minutes you weren't even on the board for, all right? Vote to approve them and send them to the town clerk. They are what they are, all right? Better to just give them what you have. If you don't have them, there's, you know, there may be no way to go back and fix it, but, you know, don't let the problem just continue to fester. Try to stay current going forward. Send the town clerk what you have. I think that's really the best thing you can do.
Yeah. And make sure to stay within your agendas, because very often people, just regular people, want to operate under the idea that if we're here, we might as well talk about it. But you guys, as public bodies, can't really operate under that mindset. You got to make sure it's on the agenda. There is an exception sometimes for things that are not, you know, if we're not going to know about them reasonably within 48 hours, if we couldn't expect to. But those are things that we probably knew about like 44 hours before the next meeting, not, you know, we've decided to talk about it 10 minutes into the meeting. So
I don't know, I may have left it out of the presentation. You can't put old business and new business on an agenda and just talk about anything, okay? If you're going to put old business on the agenda, then it should say old business and list the specific topics. If it's new business, you still have to list the specific topics. The old business, new business thing doesn't open up the door for you just to talk about anything. It doesn't cover you in any way on the open meeting law at all. Courtney's going to provide some information to you as well. The open meeting law guide from the Attorney General's office is actually really well written, and it's pretty helpful, all right? But, again, I think it's easier for you to just reach out to us to ask questions if you're not sure about some part of it. You want to do the public records?
Yeah, sure. So, public records law, that is how most of you outside of your meetings interact with the public. They will reach out to boards and committees or the town generally and ask for information. Generally, as members of a board, if the board needs something for board business, you're not going to be submitting an information request to the staff at town hall. But individual members of boards that might have questions about other things, you're all residents of the town, you can file an information request as well. And that's through public records requests. So public records, there's a legal definition, and that includes every record that is made or received by a government entity or employee. It's important for you guys to know that that is an incredibly broad definition, and that's including, maps, photographs, recorded tapes, recorded meetings online, text messages, emails, physical notes, anything. So you all need to understand that when you're acting in your position and in your authority as a member of the board or discussing board business, regardless of if the town gave you a town email address or you're using your own Gmail, all of that is discoverable information that you basically derived in the business of the board. So it's going to fall under any sort of public records request, and the town will have to turn that over. There are, however, exemptions from disclosure. So the town can't, there are certain things the town definitely can't turn over, and those are all prescribed by statute. It's, personally identifying information for people who are not, town officials. John had already talked about personnel records and when you can talk about those sorts of things. Those are generally exempt from disclosure. Some of you may be aware that more recently police discipline records used to be exempt from disclosure and are now required to be disclosed to the public in an information request. But that's all going to be governed by General Laws, Chapter 4, Section 7, Subsection 26, and there is a ton of enumerated exceptions. So, generally speaking, you guys won't be responding to requests directly. They'll come in through the town, and you will be asked to provide things such as text messages, call logs, emails, things like that nature. But even if the town does not have to provide any sort of records because they're exempt under the law, it still has to provide the person who requested it notice of why they're not receiving that information. If that stuff is generally privileged because it's attorney-client privilege, we can just simply state that. But sometimes we have to turn over a report that's partially redacted. So we'll state why those redactions have been put in and produce the rest of the records. Also important is that there is a fee generally associated with compiling these record request responses, but depending on the circumstances, the town doesn't always charge a fee if it's a single sheet of paper, if it's something readily, available to the town. But when it does become a super burdensome thing, something that's going to take 30 hours to figure out, the town will charge a fee. And what's important with that is we only have 10 business days to respond with that fee estimate. So once we receive that information request, the clock starts ticking a little bit. Any questions on that?
The public records law is very similar to the open meeting law. It's very technical. It creates a lot of work for staff in all of our town halls. And again, in the wisdom of the legislature, they've seen fit not to apply anything like that to themselves. You can't get anything out of the legislature, but it is a burden. And again, just like open meeting complaints, reach out to staff to get some help on how to deal with it. You shouldn't, as individual volunteers, get stuck, searching through volumes of paper or volumes of emails trying to comply with these things. Reach out to us and let us help you.
Okay. So the last topic we have for you today is social media and technology, which we will go over briefly because you should stay away from it generally as much as you can, especially with how it may relate to town business or the business of your boards and committees. So social media, your boards may post meeting videos and links afterwards. It helps get the word out about, town events and things like that. But anytime you find yourself individually responding to comments about town business or business of your board, you are straying into territory that could get you in trouble under any of the laws that we talked about tonight. Because you will have been seen to do that in your, authority or official capacity in that position. And what I said about authority, that's not to be confused with the authority that your board has. So sometimes members of boards go on Facebook and think they're speaking on behalf of the entire board and committee, but that is simply not true because they cannot. So often are we dealing with all of these comments and fights on town pages that are, I live in Pembroke, there's about 1 million there. It's always, growing up in Pembroke or the real Pembroke or the Pembroke Unfiltered. So I see all of those, and there's not a lot of good that's happening on those things. Everything is misconstrued, everything is twisted. So please, in your capacities, don't engage with that type of behavior or comments. And also, don't feel that you need to defend yourself or the board in every single comment that you may see on the internet, because that's also going to get you into trouble. You could also violate the open meeting law by starting to interact with at least a quorum of your board if you're all in the same group. So all of the things that we talked about when you're at home after a meeting and you may not be happy by how things went or what was discussed, that is not the time to start clacking away on the keyboard and, telling everyone how you really feel. Keep it to the meetings and you should be fine.
In the case of the zoning board, if 3 members of the zoning board are part of a closed Facebook group and they're discussing a 40B project and 1 member of the board is offering opinions on it, but there are 2 other members that are part of that group, it could be considered deliberation. So, in addition to all of the other negative aspects of participating in social media, and look, it's unfortunate. For those of you that have been involved in town government for a long time, you remember Rockland used to have at least 1 local reporter who covered all the meetings. The weekly newspaper, the Patriot Ledger, had a lot of material on what was going on in town government. That doesn't happen anymore, and what's filled the void is social media. And there is no responsibility to be accurate. There's no responsibility to be civil. We see it time and again where a really well-meaning public official tries to go on there and put accurate information out there only to get tormented by, in a lot of cases, just trolls, people with anonymous identification. It's just it's thankless. It would be great if we could find a way to use it in a respectful, productive way, but that's been a challenge up to this point. So we just suggest that you just be careful with it. No one should respond to Facebook posts after 8 o'clock at night. That's just really bad.
It's a good rule of thumb. And all of the apps and programs that you may use that are designed to make sure that other people aren't seeing what you're doing or saying generally don't work. Snapchat, those sorts of things that you think are only between you and another person and couldn't ever be recorded any other way are always recorded another way, and those are the ones that wind up in our office. So just better off keeping off. But
So we've gone through a fair amount of material fairly quickly. What questions can we answer? The gentleman in the back was before.
What overrules? Mass general law or town charter?
The town charter has the effect of state law. So if the town charter conflicts with, I'll use the planning board for example, if the provision of the town charter about the planning board conflicts with state law, the town charter supersedes it, right? But that's only for specific things that are addressed in state law. That's not a very clear answer, but.
Can you give an example?
What's that?
Can you give an example of that?
Some of the older statutes, for example, they might say that a planning board only has 3 members or something like that. If your charter says 5, it's 5, all right? So if your charter cites something really specifically, it can supersede it. What's that?
What if it was the other way around? The charter said 5, but town and state law said.
So maybe this is a better way to explain it. What your charter will generally say, you know, it's adopted by the legislature, it will generally say that it supersedes anything specifically addressing the exact same subject in state law. But the charter generally does supersede it. And again, most of the statutes that govern these boards and committees go back 50, 60, 70 years. They're old statutes. So the charters generally do supersede them. Yes.
Where the town charter clearly specifies a requirement, and in this case, I'm referring to section C 2.02L, that specifies that the select board shall make appointments within 30 days following the town election, and they fail to do so. What are the penalties for that, and how can compliance be compelled, especially where it leaves a committee without a quorum and unable to function for months? How is the town charter enforced?
There is no specific legal authority to enforce it. I mean, in theory, people could file a 10 taxpayer lawsuit to do that. But, I mean, it also says that the board should try to fill vacancies as soon as possible, too, right? That's what they should do.
Yes.
But a lot of times vacancies come up after the 30 days of the town election. They come up after that period of time. So,
And that same provision also says that a committee member may continue to serve until a replacement has been appointed and sworn in. But your opinion is that may means only with the assent of the select board.
right.
Is there a case law or precedent or
No, but,
statute governing that opinion?
May and shall are given a lot of significance in any statute. May is permissive, in the permissive authority, in this case, is the select board, but it's not required. That kind of continued service really would need to be with the approval of the board.
But the provision in the town charter says that the committee member may continue to serve.
Right.
It sounds to me like it's the prerogative of the committee member to continue to serve.
It's, the way I read that is really the prerogative of the appointing authority, which in this case was the select board.
So if the town charter has has the effect of state law, is a failure to comply with the town charter a violation of state law?
You could seek enforcement, like I said, through a 10 taxpayer lawsuit. And it's not just true of the select board. Compliance with the charter is limited for any elected official. So any elected board or committee. The selectmen don't have any authority to force compliance of any elected official. So it's really an unanswered question. The only way that I'm aware of that you could force compliance is to file that kind of 10 taxpayer lawsuit with the court and have the court order compliance. Nobody in town government is given that kind of authority. In Massachusetts, we like to think of ourselves as being very progressive. But in fact, much of the way we run town government goes back to the colonial days. And that kind of lack of centralized authority, it leaves a lot of issues unaddressed. You know, if you have any board or committee that's run by elected officials or an elected official that's underperforming, the reality is there's nobody in town government that can do anything about it.
So if the select board decided to never hold appointment or reappointment hearings for a committee, they could effectively just shut the committee down permanently. Is that the case?
That's possible. That is possible, sure. I don't think that that's happened. I think people, they try to get the business of the town done, especially for those boards or committees that have to make decisions that affect people personally. Other questions, comments? Courtney?
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. I appreciate, again, your time here. I will, again, send all this information to you by email. My card is up here. You're welcome to take it. As John and Rich mentioned, you can always reach out to myself or Doug with any questions. I will be sending some additional resources. Actually, they are the AG's guidance documents. So I'll just probably send a link to. It's in the PowerPoint presentation. But please don't hesitate to reach out to our office with any questions. And I just want to thank you all for your time tonight. Thank you, John and Rich, for joining us. And we appreciate it.